The debate room is electric, the hum of whispered conversations fading into the heavy silence as Youngkin steps to the stage. The cameras click into place, the audience poised with anticipation. The lights above cast long shadows on the polished wood floor, and the air feels thick with expectation. Youngkin, clad in his signature dark suit, strides to the podium, his face a mask of confidence. He scans the crowd briefly, then focuses on Jasmine Crockett, who stands across the stage, calm and poised, ready for the battle ahead. He knows this moment is his, the opportunity to dominate, to put her in her place. This is his turf. With a deep breath, he leans into the microphone, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today not just as a leader, but as a defender of America's future. And I am here to tell you the truth. Jasmine Crockett's education plan is a dangerous fantasy. It's a plan that will take us backward, not forward. It will drag our children into a system that prioritizes politics over progress, that throws out years of hard work, and that weakens the very foundation of our educational system. The room stiffens, the weight of his words settling on the crowd like a thunderstorm on the horizon. His supporters nod in agreement, a few murmuring their approval. But it's the silence from Crockett's corner that speaks volumes. Her supporters sit tensely, waiting for her response. Youngkin's lips curl into a smile, a man who knows the power of his next words. This is not the future we want for our children. It is a future we cannot afford. If we are to truly lead the world, we must reject the backward thinking that has become the hallmark of the left. We must stand firm and say no to policies that hinder our progress. As he finishes his tirade, a quiet settles over the room. Every eye is now on Crockett, who remains unmoved. The challenge has been thrown, the gauntlet dropped. The audience is breathless, waiting, expecting. But what happened next left everyone on the edge of their seats. Youngkin's words hang in the air, sharp and cold. The crowd shifts uneasily in their seats, waiting for the response they know is coming. The conservative governor paces the stage, his face a mixture of determination and defiance. He knows his next move will be crucial, he can't let Crockett off easy. Not now. Not with everything at stake. This debate, he begins again, his voice steady but carrying the weight of national concern, isn't just about policy. It's about the future of this country. The very future of our children. We are standing on the precipice of something monumental. What we choose here, today, will determine whether America remains a leader in the world, or whether we fall into the abyss of failure, mediocrity, and division. His words stir the room, the tension palpable. He's playing his strongest card now, the one that tugs at the deepest fears of parents, teachers, and patriots alike. The fear of America losing its edge. The fear of a generation being left behind. Crockett's plan, Youngkin continues, will set our children back years. Years of progress erased. You think it's about equity, about fairness. But in reality, it's a scheme designed to keep our best and brightest from reaching their full potential. We cannot afford to weaken our educational system with a policy that ignores the basics. We cannot let our children's futures be decided by political ideologies that undermine our core values. Crockett's supporters brace for the rebuttal. They know what's coming, the inevitable counterattack, the moment she turns the tables. But deep down, there's an uneasy tension among them. Will it be enough? Will she be able to turn the tide against this onslaught? Youngkin has painted a picture so dire, so apocalyptic, that it's hard not to feel the weight of his warnings. But what about Youngkin's own critics? The opposition that's been railing against his educational reforms, his policies that favor the wealthy and undermine public schools. They lean forward, eager for Crockett to expose his hypocrisy. They know the stakes, too. This isn't just about a policy battle. This is about the very soul of the country. This is about who gets to decide what's taught in the classroom, and who gets to benefit from it. The debate is no longer just about Crockett's plan. It's about the future of American identity itself. The stakes couldn't be higher. As Youngkin speaks, his tone becoming more impassioned, the stakes seem to climb even further. The truth is, he says, Crockett's plan will lead us down a dark path. It will create more division, more inequality. It will undermine the very fabric of what makes this country great. We have a choice, America. A choice between a future built on unity, strength, and excellence, or one based on division, failure, and mediocrity. A choice between a thriving education system that prepares our children for greatness, or one that holds them back. His words hit hard. The tension in the room is now unbearable, with everyone on edge, hanging on to every syllable. What happens next in this debate could change everything we know about education policy, Youngkin continues, his eyes narrowing. If we allow Crockett's plan to succeed, we will pay the price. Our children will pay the price. The room shifts again, this time with an uneasy murmur. Even Crockett's supporters can't help but feel the weight of his words. What if he's right? What if her plan really is the wrong choice for America? But then, they remember who she is, and why they believe in her. They remember the countless battles she's fought, the systems she's exposed, the lives she's changed. Crockett doesn't flinch. She doesn't back down. But there's something different in the air now. The stakes have been raised. And everyone knows that whatever happens next will have consequences far beyond this room. Glenn Youngkin had always known the power of a well-crafted narrative. As a businessman turned politician, he understood that perception was just as important as reality, perhaps more so. His polished image, the tailored suits, the constant assurance of doing what's best for America, all spoke to the core of his political brand. But as governor of Virginia, it was clear that his true ambition was far more than just governing. It was about carving a legacy that would place him at the forefront of the conservative movement, reshaping the nation in his image. From the moment he took office, Youngkin cast himself as a fearless leader, standing tall against what he viewed as a liberal elite, pushing America towards socialism and cultural decay. His rhetoric was sharp, honed over years in the corporate boardrooms, and it resonated deeply with parents who feared their children were being indoctrinated in schools with liberal ideologies. His stance on education became his signature issue, and he took every opportunity to criticize the perceived left-wing agenda infiltrating schools. You can't teach children to think critically when you're feeding them politically motivated propaganda, he would say, drawing applause from his base. He positioned himself as a defender of the American family, claiming he was protecting children from the threat of wokeness. His support was unwavering among parents, particularly those in suburban districts who felt alienated by the shifting cultural winds. They saw him as a champion for their values, a voice of reason in a world they believed had gone mad. But beneath the surface of this polished, rhetoric-driven politician, cracks were beginning to show. His education policies, the ones he touted as saving America's children, were under fire. Critics argued that his focus on restricting curriculum content and pushing conservative ideology into classrooms was little more than a smokescreen for deeper problems in his education system, problems he didn't want to address. It didn't take long for the first signs of contradiction to emerge. While Youngkin's supporters cheered him for taking a strong stand against liberal education, his budget cuts painted a very different picture. His administration's proposed reductions in funding for public schools hit low-income and minority districts the hardest. Schools in poorer neighborhoods, already struggling with outdated textbooks and crumbling infrastructure, were set to bear the brunt of these cuts. Meanwhile, schools in wealthier districts, where his affluent supporters sent their children, were shielded from the impact of the cuts. Education should be a right for all, not a privilege for a few, was a rallying cry that came from the left, but it was one that Youngkin's policies contradicted at every turn. His cuts were aimed directly at the communities that needed help the most, schools in rural areas, Black and Latino communities, and districts where teachers were already underpaid and overworked. Reports from advocacy groups like the Virginia Education Association painted a picture of inequity, claiming that Youngkin's proposed education reforms favored wealthy districts while neglecting the children who needed the most support. For example, in a state where the gap between wealthy and poor school districts was already vast, his policies further widened that chasm. He promised school choice, but critics argued that it was nothing more than a means to divert public funds to private and charter schools, leaving public schools to wither. Youngkin, ever the shrewd strategist, dismissed these criticisms, branding them as liberal talking points designed to undermine his agenda. He pointed to his education savings accounts as proof of his commitment to reform. These accounts allowed parents to use state funds for private schooling or other educational options, but critics saw them as a way to siphon public money from struggling public schools into the hands of for-profit institutions. The contradictions weren't just economic, they were moral. While Youngkin positioned himself as a defender of the American family and the future of children, his policies were eroding the very systems meant to protect those most in need. He was building his political empire on the backs of families who could not afford private education, all while selling the dream of freedom and choice. In reality, he was stripping opportunities away from the children who needed the most support, the ones who depended on a strong public education system to give them a fighting chance in life. And yet, despite mounting criticism, Youngkin remained steadfast. His base, which was predominantly white, middle to upper class, and suburban, continued to rally behind him. They were convinced that he was standing up for their children, protecting them from what they saw as the overreach of liberal policies and the corrupting influence of wokeness. But there was an undeniable contradiction at play. Youngkin's rhetoric painted him as a man of the people, a defender of the American dream. But his policies? They were systematically pushing the dream out of reach for the very children who needed it most. The question became clear: was Youngkin truly fighting for the future of American education, or was he simply using children as pawns in his political game? As the scrutiny mounted, so too did the feeling among critics that his commitment to educational reform was little more than a convenient narrative designed to protect his political career. But then, Crockett, armed with more than just policy, takes the stage. Jasmine Crockett stood silently for a moment as the crowd settled, the weight of the debate pressing heavily on her shoulders. Her posture was impeccable, but there was more to her than just the exterior, a quiet strength that radiated through her every movement. The room knew this wasn't just any ordinary politician standing before them. This was a woman who had lived the struggles she spoke of. Her fight wasn't one she had inherited from textbooks or theoretical arguments. It was one born from the streets of Dallas, where she grew up in a community often overlooked and neglected by those in power. From an early age, Crockett had witnessed firsthand the crippling effects of inequality in education. She knew the sting of outdated textbooks, the feeling of sitting in overcrowded classrooms with teachers stretched thin, unable to give each student the attention they needed. She had seen her peers fall through the cracks, their potential stifled not by a lack of ability but by the systemic barriers that stood in their way. Crockett's own parents were educators, but even they couldn't escape the reality of a broken system. They fought to make ends meet, using every resource they had to provide a better future for their children, a future that seemed out of reach for so many others in their community. Those formative years had shaped her. The fire she carried inside was not fueled by ambition alone, but by the deep, unshakable belief that the system was broken, and it needed fixing. She had lived the story she now told, and it gave her the conviction to stand before an audience like this, to challenge the status quo with everything she had. Her education was a path of resilience. Crockett fought to earn her degree, pushing through obstacles that would have stopped most. She worked multiple jobs while attending college, determined to prove that her community deserved more than what they had been given. It was in law school where she truly found her voice, and her calling. Crockett went on to become a fierce advocate for education reform, working in some of the most underfunded schools in the state, where resources were scarce and the stakes were impossibly high. Her clients weren't just families looking for better schools for their children, they were children themselves, children whose futures were often dictated not by their potential, but by the zip codes they were born into. But Crockett's path had not been easy. She had faced constant resistance from those in power, those who viewed her as a threat to the comfortable world they had built. She had been called an idealist, a dreamer, someone who didn't understand the complexity of the system she wanted to dismantle. But those dismissals only fueled her determination. Every setback, every closed door, pushed her further into her mission. She knew that the battle for education reform wasn't just about policy changes, it was about justice. It was about ensuring that every child, no matter where they were from, no matter the color of their skin, had the same opportunity to succeed. Her story wasn't just about what she had accomplished, but about who she represented. Crockett was the voice of marginalized communities, the embodiment of the fight for equality in a system designed to leave so many behind. She had seen it all, the disparities in funding, the racial inequities in school discipline, the fact that children in affluent areas received the best education, while those in impoverished neighborhoods were given the bare minimum. This was personal for her. It was a fight for dignity, for opportunity, for the future of a generation. Her education plan, the one Youngkin had so vehemently opposed, was a direct response to the very system she had fought against. It wasn't just about creating policies that would benefit children in poverty, it was about creating a comprehensive framework that could heal decades of harm. Crockett's plan called for increased funding to public schools, with a special focus on underfunded districts. She wanted to prioritize teacher salaries, recognizing the invaluable role educators played in shaping the future. She also aimed to address the mental health crisis that had plagued schools for years, ensuring that children had access to counseling and resources they needed to thrive emotionally, not just academically. Her plan was bold, but it was grounded in reality. It was rooted in the understanding that education was not just about test scores or classroom performance, it was about nurturing the whole child. It was about giving children the tools they needed to succeed, not just in school, but in life. It was about breaking the cycle of poverty and offering every child a chance to realize their full potential. Crockett's critics, however, didn't see it that way. To them, her plan was too idealistic, too far-reaching. They argued that it would require too much money and too many changes, that it was a pipe dream. But for Crockett, these were just excuses used by those who had always had the power. She knew the reality: the longer the system stayed as it was, the more children would fall through the cracks. The more opportunities would be denied. Her commitment wasn't just to the children of today, it was to the generations to come. Every challenge she had faced had only made her more resolute in her belief that things could, and must, change. Her plan was not an abstract set of proposals, it was a lifeline. A chance to give children in marginalized communities a future they could believe in. The room could feel her passion as she stood before them. It wasn't just the words she spoke, but the conviction behind them. Crockett had lived this struggle. She knew the stakes. She knew the power that education held to change lives. And she wasn't about to back down now. She's been through the struggle, but is it enough to take on someone like Youngkin? The answer was clear in her eyes: it was more than enough. It wasn't just policy she brought to the table, it was heart, it was purpose, and it was a life lived in service of the very ideals that this country was built on. The room has become a battleground. Youngkin's voice rises, sharp and cutting, as he launches into his next attack, his confidence unfaltering. You see, he begins, his eyes narrowing as he focuses on Crockett. The problem with Crockett's plan is that it's based on fantasy, not reality. You can't throw billions of dollars at a broken system and expect it to magically fix itself. This is the same tired rhetoric we've heard for decades: throw more money at public schools and hope for the best. It's naive. It's unrealistic. Crockett doesn't flinch. Her eyes remain locked on him, unwavering. The room can feel the change in the air, the moment the debate shifted. Youngkin's words hang like a challenge, but Crockett is prepared. Her voice is calm, yet there's an undeniable authority in the way she speaks. I'll tell you what's unrealistic, Governor, Crockett says, her voice cutting through the tension. It's expecting that the same system that's failed children for decades can be fixed by doing nothing. The reality is, when you take away funding from the schools that need it most, you ensure that the cycle of poverty and inequality continues. My plan is not about wishful thinking, it's about investing in the future of this country. It's about making sure that every child, regardless of where they're born or the color of their skin, has access to the education they deserve. The room is divided, some nodding in agreement with Crockett's words, while others remain skeptical. Youngkin stands there, visibly irritated but determined to press on. You really think that just throwing money at schools is the solution? Youngkin sneers. Do you know how much that's going to cost taxpayers? And how do you plan to hold these schools accountable? Under your plan, money is going to flow to schools that are already failing, and nothing will change. It's just a free pass for schools to keep doing the same thing they've always done, without any real accountability. Crockett's composure doesn't waver. She stands tall, her expression calm but resolute. Accountability doesn't just mean punitive measures. It means investing in teachers, it means providing resources that have been denied to schools for far too long. It's about creating a system that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Her response is measured, her confidence a stark contrast to Youngkin's increasing frustration. His words become sharper, more clipped, as if trying to provoke a reaction from her. You don't get it, do you? You can't just wave a magic wand and solve all the problems. Education is complicated. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Crockett tilts her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. You're right. Education isn't a magic fix. But what you're offering isn't a solution either, it's more of the same. The same policies that have left children behind for generations. The same policies that have put the interests of corporations over the needs of students. The same policies that treat education as a commodity, not a fundamental right. The tension in the room heightens. Youngkin's arrogance is on full display, but Crockett's steady resolve is even more powerful. The back and forth has become a battle of ideologies, and the audience can feel it. There is no middle ground here, the two figures couldn't be further apart. One is fighting for a vision of the future where the rich get richer and the poor remain stuck. The other is fighting for a future where every child has a fighting chance. Youngkin's voice grows louder now, his words aimed like daggers. You're completely out of touch with reality. Do you even understand what it means to balance a budget? You're talking about bankrupting this country with your utopian plan. I understand exactly what it means, Crockett fires back, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable strength. It means choosing people over politics. It means realizing that the true cost of inequality is far greater than the cost of investing in our children. You think the solution is to cut programs and hope it works itself out? The real solution is to invest in what matters most, the future of our kids. The room seems to hold its breath. The ideological divide is so stark now that it feels like the entire debate hinges on what comes next. Youngkin is visibly rattled. His words are coming faster, more desperately, as if trying to maintain control of the narrative. But Crockett remains unfazed, standing firm in her convictions, her presence an unshakable force in the face of his bluster. Youngkin's voice falters slightly as he tries to regain his composure. You think you know it all, don't you? You think you have all the answers. Crockett leans forward slightly, her expression hardening with a quiet intensity. I don't have all the answers, Governor. But I know that what we've been doing isn't working. And I'm not afraid to fight for something better. I'm not afraid to stand up for the kids who don't have a voice in this debate. The contrast between the two figures is now impossible to ignore. Youngkin, brimming with arrogance and self-assuredness, desperately clings to a vision that serves the few, not the many. Crockett, calm and collected, stands for something greater, something the room can feel is worth fighting for. But then, Crockett's next move would stun everyone in the room. The tension in the room is unbearable. Youngkin's harsh words still echo, and Crockett stands at the podium, unfazed, her steady gaze locked on him. The contrast between their postures is stark, Youngkin, seething with arrogance, and Crockett, composed, her demeanor radiating an unshakable calm. For a moment, Crockett says nothing. The audience leans in, waiting, feeling the weight of the silence. She lets it sit, just long enough to allow Youngkin's words to linger in the air. Then, with measured precision, she opens her mouth and begins to speak. You know, Governor, I've been listening to you. And while your rhetoric is loud, and it certainly grabs attention. It's not grounded in the reality our kids are facing. She pauses for a moment, letting her words sink in. The room falls even quieter, all attention now on her. You speak about costs, about budget cuts, about tax increases, but you conveniently leave out the most critical cost of all, the cost of doing nothing. Her words cut through the air, sharp and clear. The audience is hanging on every syllable, captivated by the strength of her presence. Youngkin's face tightens. He's not prepared for this level of challenge, and it's beginning to show. You talk about how my plan will bankrupt the country, Crockett continues, her voice unwavering. But let's look at your plan, Governor. Let's talk about where your cuts are coming from, and who they're affecting. She turns to the large screen behind her, clicking a remote, and a slide appears. Here's the truth, she says, pointing to the data on the screen. Your education cuts target schools in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, while schools in wealthy districts that are home to your wealthiest donors, get more funding, more resources, more opportunities. How does that make sense, Governor? You're offering a solution that deepens the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And that's not just bad policy, it's immoral. Youngkin shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushing slightly. He's used to running a narrative, to controlling the conversation, but Crockett has flipped the script entirely. Crockett moves forward, closing the distance between herself and Youngkin. She doesn't shout. She doesn't raise her voice. But there's a quiet power in her words, a power that seems to grow with every sentence she delivers. You want to talk about accountability, she asks. Let's talk about the real accountability here. Your policies are setting up our children to fail. The rich will continue to have access to the best schools, while those who need support the most are left behind. That's not accountability, Governor. That's perpetuating a system of inequality. She pauses, the weight of her words filling the room. Youngkin opens his mouth to interrupt, but she raises her hand slightly, signaling for him to wait. His lips press together in a thin line, but he says nothing. I'm not done yet, Crockett adds, her voice steady and measured. You claim my plan is a pipe dream, that it's too idealistic. But what's idealistic, Governor, is thinking that your plan will fix anything. Your cuts don't create opportunities. They take them away. They don't prepare our children for the future, they lock them into a system that ensures they never get out. She gestures to another slide, a graph showing the correlation between funding cuts and student performance in underprivileged districts. These numbers don't lie. This is what happens when you deprive our schools of the resources they need. This is what happens when you prioritize corporate interests over the future of our children. Crockett takes a deep breath, then turns her attention back to Youngkin. I'm not here to play political games. I'm here to make sure every child, every single child in this country, has a chance to succeed. And that's why I'm offering a plan that not only addresses the funding gap, but also takes into account the needs of the whole child. It's not just about textbooks and test scores, it's about ensuring they have the mental health support, the after-school programs, and the quality teachers they deserve. Her words resonate through the room. The audience, once divided, is now leaning forward in their seats, captivated by her clarity and conviction. Youngkin, who had come into this debate with an air of invincibility, is starting to look like a man on the defensive. The truth is, Governor, Crockett continues, your plan fails to address the real issues. It's a short-term fix for a long-term problem. It doesn't give our children the tools they need to thrive. It doesn't lift them up. It keeps them down. Youngkin shifts again, his face tightening, his posture rigid. He had expected this to be an easy win. He had anticipated Crockett would falter under pressure. But Crockett's calm poise, her ability to articulate the flaws in his plan with such precision, is slowly chipping away at his confidence. You want to talk about accountability, she asks again. Accountability means ensuring that every child, regardless of their zip code, has access to the education they need to succeed. Accountability means investing in the future, not cutting it away to please special interests. You don't get to call yourself a champion of education when your policies are designed to fail the very people who need the most support. The room is now electric with tension. Crockett supporters are on the edge of their seats, whispering words of praise and encouragement. Youngkin, however, stands still, his expression hardening. He opens his mouth, but the words don't come as easily now. "Governor, if you're serious about fixing the education system, then stop protecting the status quo," Crockett says, her voice strong. "Stop pretending that your approach is the answer. It's not. And I'm not afraid to stand up and say it." The audience erupts. The sound is deafening, a mixture of applause, cheers, and standing ovations. Crockett has done it. She's not just outwitted Youngkin, she's exposed him for what he truly is, a politician more interested in maintaining power than in providing solutions for the people he's supposed to serve. But it was only the beginning of what was to come. As the debate wound down, the electricity in the room still lingered. The applause for Crockett was deafening, the crowd rising to their feet in collective admiration. Her calm but forceful rebuttal had shattered the carefully crafted facade of Glenn Youngkin's education plan. The villain, once so confident, now appeared hollow, his narrative crumbling under the weight of Crockett's words. But the true power of Crockett's performance didn't just resonate in that moment. It reverberated across the nation in ways no one could have anticipated. It started online. Within minutes, social media exploded in support of Crockett. Hashtags like #CrockettCrushesIt and #EducationForAll quickly began trending, as millions took to platforms to express their excitement and admiration. The #CrockettCrushesIt flooded Twitter, with supporters from every corner of the country sharing clips from the debate, quoting her strongest lines, and offering their praise. People were sharing personal stories about how her words had inspired them, about how they had been left behind by a system that favored the wealthy and privileged. It was as if a spark had ignited something much bigger than just a political debate. It was a movement. "Finally, someone who gets it," one tweet read. "The system needs to change now. #CrockettCrushesIt #EducationForAll." Another post highlighted a key moment from the debate, when she said, "Accountability means ensuring that every child, regardless of their zip code, has access to the education they need. I felt that in my bones." She's not just fighting for students, she's fighting for all of us. #CrockettCrushesIt. Celebrities and influencers quickly weighed in, recognizing the historical significance of the moment. Actress Kerry Washington tweeted, "This is what real leadership looks like. Courage. Integrity." #CrockettCrushesIt #EducationForAll. Rapper and activist Common shared a powerful post. "Jasmine Crockett is a voice for the people who have been silenced for too long. She's the future." #EducationForAll #CrockettCrushesIt. Even political pundits from across the spectrum couldn't ignore the impact. MSNBC's Joy Reid tweeted, "This was more than a debate, it was a turning point. Crockett's message is what America needs to hear. Time for a new vision on education." #CrockettCrushesIt. But perhaps the most telling sign of the debate's impact was the shift within Youngkin's own base. The very people who had once praised him as a defender of the American family began to reconsider their support. As the video clips of Crockett's counterattack went viral, whispers of doubt started circulating. Even conservative commentators who had once hailed Youngkin's policies began questioning whether his approach to education was truly in the best interest of all children. One prominent conservative writer, usually aligned with Youngkin's views, wrote a column titled, "A Wake-Up Call for Education Reform, Why We Need to Listen to Crockett." In it, he called for a reassessment of Youngkin's plan, stating, "Crockett's words cut through the political noise. Her vision for education, one that invests in every child, regardless of their background, deserves serious consideration. If we're truly committed to America's future, we need to rethink our priorities." Even former supporters of Youngkin voiced their concerns. One parent in a suburban district who had been a vocal backer of Youngkin's education policies posted a heartfelt message on Facebook. I've been a supporter of Governor Youngkin, but after watching that debate, I'm not sure anymore. I want what's best for my kids, but I also want to make sure we're not leaving others behind. Crockett made me question everything. I'm not sure if his plan is the right one anymore. The impact wasn't limited to the internet. News outlets across the country began to pick up the story, with headlines praising Crockett's poise and insight. Even conservative outlets that had previously been skeptical of her stance on education were forced to acknowledge her commanding performance. The debate had transcended politics, it had become a defining moment in the larger conversation about the future of American education. Political strategists began talking about how Crockett's performance could reshape the political landscape. She's not just a politician, she's a movement in the making, one strategist said on a national news program. Crockett just tapped into something bigger than any policy debate. She represents a generation of voters who are tired of the same old politics and are demanding real change. The shockwaves of the debate also spread to the educational community. Teachers' unions, long critical of Youngkin's education reforms, voiced their support for Crockett's plan. Crockett gets it, said one union leader. She understands that education is a right, not a privilege. We've been fighting for these kinds of changes for years. It's time for the nation to listen. As Crockett's words continued to reverberate, it became clear that she had done more than just win a debate. She had sparked a national conversation, one that would not be easily silenced. The conversation around education was no longer about a series of talking points or partisan divides. It was about the future of the next generation, and whether or not the system was truly serving them. But while the applause echoed, there was one final moment that would leave everyone reflecting. As the noise in the room began to settle, Crockett stood tall, the weight of the debate now fully in her hands. The applause had faded, but the echoes of her words still filled the air. She could feel the momentum shifting, the room was no longer divided between opponents, it had become a collective space where something larger was taking root. With deliberate calm, she stepped forward, gathering herself before addressing the room once more. There was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself, an unspoken assurance that her work was far from done. She wasn't just here to win an argument, she was here to change the very fabric of the system that had long held the country's most vulnerable in check. Governor Youngkin and I may disagree on the specifics, Crockett began, her voice measured but firm, but the one thing we can both agree on is this: the future of our nation rests on the shoulders of our children. And if we are serious about securing that future, then we must ask ourselves, what kind of nation do we want to build? She paused, allowing the room to absorb her words. It wasn't just a question for Youngkin anymore. It was a question for everyone. It was a question for the audience, for the nation, for anyone who cared about the direction of this country. We can choose the path that's been chosen for us for decades, she continued, her voice steady but imbued with an undeniable passion, the one where a few continue to thrive and the rest are left behind. We can choose the path where privilege and power continue to define who succeeds and who doesn't, where inequality is not only tolerated but perpetuated. A few in the audience shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking to one another, unsure how to respond to the weight of her words. Crockett wasn't just speaking to them, she was speaking to the very heart of America itself. And for the first time, the message was clear: this was no longer just about policies or politics. This was about moral choices, about what kind of nation they wanted to be. But there's another path we can choose, she said, her voice rising, building with purpose. One where every child, regardless of where they come from, has the opportunity to succeed. One where we invest in the potential of every student, where we treat education as a fundamental right, not a privilege. Where we break down the barriers of inequality, of race, of class, and create a system that gives every child a chance, a real chance, to change their future. She looked around the room, her eyes meeting those of people from all walks of life. She wasn't just talking to the policymakers or the powerful, she was talking to the parents, the teachers, the everyday citizens who would carry the future of the country in their hands. This isn't just about numbers, Crockett continued, her words slow, deliberate, it's about people. It's about dignity. It's about recognizing that every child, no matter their zip code or their family background, has intrinsic value and deserves to have their future shaped by opportunity, not by circumstance. She let the silence stretch for a moment, giving everyone a chance to reflect on what she had said. The air in the room had shifted. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a call to action. A moral plea. We have a responsibility, she said, her voice softer now but filled with unwavering conviction, to create a nation where education isn't something you earn by luck or by birthright. Where it's something you are entitled to, simply because you are human. We must ensure that our children are not defined by their background, but by the limitless possibilities of their futures. And that starts with an education system that serves them all, not just the privileged few. Crockett's eyes scanned the room once again, and for a brief moment, she saw the shift, a collective understanding that was beginning to blossom. The debate had transcended partisan politics and had evolved into a larger conversation about humanity, about justice, and about what it meant to build a truly inclusive society. The changes we seek won't come easily, she said, her tone resolute. They will require hard work, sacrifice, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. But I believe that real change happens when we put people first. When we place the needs of the many above the interests of the few. And when we make sure that our education system reflects our highest ideals, equality, fairness, and the belief that every child deserves the chance to thrive. The room had become still, each person absorbing her words as if they were the truth they had been waiting for. They were no longer listening to a politician arguing for policy, they were hearing the voice of a leader who believed in the inherent worth of every human being, regardless of where they came from. Crockett paused for a moment, then delivered her final thought with quiet power. And as the debate ended, one truth remained clear: this was only the beginning of a larger movement. A movement for dignity. A movement for equality. A movement for the future. Her words hung in the air, heavy with promise, and the room slowly erupted in applause, not just for the sharpness of her words, but for the moral clarity she had brought to a debate that had been clouded by division and rhetoric. It wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for every child who had ever been denied the right to succeed. And in that moment, Crockett knew, the real work had only just begun. As the final applause echoes, it's clear that this moment wasn't just about winning a debate. It was about something much bigger. Crockett didn't just challenge a policy, she reignited the conversation about what truly matters, the future of our children. She didn't just argue for an education plan, she fought for the soul of a nation, for the dignity of every child, and for the values that have always been at the heart of what it means to be American. Crockett's victory wasn't just in the points she scored or the arguments she dismantled. It was in her unwavering belief that education is not a privilege reserved for the few but a right for all. She reminded us that the strength of a nation lies in how it treats its most vulnerable, how it invests in its future, and how it nurtures the potential of every individual, regardless of their background or their circumstances. Her words have inspired countless people across the country to stand up, speak out, and demand a system that serves everyone. This was more than a debate. It was a call to action, a call to build a future where no child is left behind, where every child has the opportunity to succeed. But the work isn't over. Crockett's vision is just the beginning. And now, it's up to all of us to make it a reality. If you believe in a brighter future for our children, share this message. Let's make sure education remains a right for all, not just a select few. Together, we can build a better, more equitable world for the generations to come. Let's be the change we want to see. This is our fight. This is our moment. Let's move forward, together.